Hello, everybody. It's Dan McTeague again at Canadians for Affordable Energy. We haven't spoken in a couple of weeks, but I wanted to sort of bring you up to speed with what many of you have been writing in about and talking to me about in my many travels over the past couple of weeks. The big one comes down to some kind of idea around leaving a lot of people scratching their head as to what net zero really is. And net zero sounds good on paper. Everyone thinks it's wonderful, and it has this great sounding ring to it. And of course, it's all done because it's ostensibly meant to do something good for the environment, which in turn is supposed to be good for all of us. But of course, we say here at Affordable Energy, not so quickly. Net zero is actually a construct, a marketing construct, if you will, by those who've been looking for an opportunity to try to change society towards what they believe is an agenda, really about controlling our lives, very much controlling what we eat, how we heat, what we use for transportation. And the idea behind is that if we don't achieve this net neutrality in the amount of carbon that we emit, that somehow the world is going to come to an end. There are a lot of debates about that, and we have seen unusual weather in our time, certainly magnified by sensationalism. But the reality, I think, for many is that net zero tends to be not just one policy, as we see here in Canada, of carbon taxes. It tends to be a strategy by which we tell people the best way in which they can proceed with things in life is to ensure that governments and people do everything they can to limit what they're doing. I say limit what they're doing because the alternatives aren't there. We've seen this in Ontario and many other places where so-called renewables, clean energy, which is just one aspect, one sort of dimension of net zero, doesn't work in a country like Canada, which is cold in the winter, in which we have less light, in which we don't always have wind. So the intermittency of things like solar and wind, which is the ultimate proposal of many of these advocates for net zero, is not designed to in any way, shape, or form replace the energy that we currently need today. Now, there is a war. Of course, this is a war waged against fossil fuels. One of the interim means by which net zero can be properly applied to fossil fuels, not just their reduction, but if somehow you can sequester the amount of carbon that comes out of them. We talk about carbon a lot because we've pretty much addressed a lot of other pollutants. And to use the term pollution in terms of carbon is a little weird because you need carbon, as we all know, as part of our society, as part of our ability to plants to grow and for photosynthesis. There's a number of processes involved. But net zero basically says, no, carbon's bad and you have to have it down to a point where you're not producing any. Look, man-made emissions are considered by most, even the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, to be at about 0.04%. As it currently stands. Of that amount, human activity is responsible for 3%. So when you think about it, you're actually looking at a number that is so infinitesimally small that you have to consider that there are other factors involved. Many scientists, 1,609, have signed on that said there's no climate crisis, which of course is an offshoot, if you will, of net zero. And have said very clearly there are other factors to consider. Some suggest clouds, some suggest that while there is warming, it may be due to things such as an extreme amount of vapor that, which of course is the largest greenhouse gas, that has been put into the air as a result of last year's, explosion of the volcano, the Hungatunga event episode, which pushed and added about 10% humidity to the atmosphere in a very short period of time, and we're paying for that. Of course, there's also El Nino and other effects. The reality here is that the climate, the weather is not static. And while at times it looks pretty scary, when I served as minister responsible for Canadians abroad, or Privy Council, call it what you want, I saw hurricanes, and I was responsible for trying to get Canadians out of harm's way with devastating hurricanes like Katrina and Wilma and others that hit the U.S. Gulf Coast. You know what? We haven't seen that this year, with the exception of Hurricane Idalia. We have not seen any activity whatsoever in that very vulnerable area. We've seen a lot happening in the Atlantic, and we're seeing some of the effects of that as Hurricane Lee becomes downgrades to a tropical storm. What we are really confronted with net zero is the excuse to use any unusual weather that isn't perfect, that where it isn't, sunny 70 degrees or 26 degrees all day and a bit of rain one day and a bit of rain other, not much wind. If we're looking for that kind of utopia in terms of weather, well, that's not the way, the intricacies of our climate functions. And one doesn't have to be a climate scientist to recognize that while we have incidents around the world, and we have always had incidents around the world, it is man's involvement with those things that is a direct involvement. Building homes in floodplains, building homes in areas that are known for, to be prone to forest fires, as we saw in Kelowna. And of course, human error, discarding a cigarette or accidentally lighting something and causing a forest fire, or worse, arson. All of these suggest that we have to begin to take everything in perspective. Why? I returned from Europe with 4 conservative members of parliament in June. I did so at a time in which The Economist, in its May 10th edition, put a very interesting article forward saying that more people in Europe died in 2022 as a result of high energy prices as opposed to COVID. When you think of those kind of numbers, you have to put things in their proper perspective and understand that while we have an obligation to posterity and an obligation to our society and an obligation to ensuring the proper stewardship of the environment, it is not a license to go out and try to take advantage of people and to somehow suggest mankind is the problem. Human beings are the problem. As the old adage goes, if our attack on is so important on carbon, what carbon are they really looking to reduce? Human carbon? Because at the end of the day, what we're really looking at here is a policy driven by the United Nations, driven by the World Economic Forum, added on with hundreds of groups and foundations and organizations that want to be part of this, and part of this in order to try to create some sensational headlines about how bad things are getting, when in fact the human condition has improved, in no small part because of fossil fuels. I'm not a big friend of oil companies. They don't like me. I predict gas prices every day, but I do recognize the importance of things like coal, of things like oil, of things like products like diesel that maintains our trucks, our rail, our vessel in the high seas, whether that be jets in the air or keeping us warm as natural gas and propane also do. You cannot do without these things. Mixed in with other forms of energy, there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what makes Canada's variety of energy, eclectic variety of energy, so important. We should not be sacrificing one to promote another, especially when we know the promotion of renewables will lead to a lessening of energy, which in turn leads to dismal consequences, as we have seen in Europe. It leads to high energy prices and people having to choose between heating and eating. We at Canadians for Affordable Energy are completely opposed to that, and that's our raison d'etre. I wish more people out there who think that this is all about climate denialism really need a lesson in climate realism. And they need to understand that the public will go along with something as long as they recognize that there's a goal. The goal we see so far is nothing more than the grifting for a handful of individuals who make a lot of money by promoting the net zero fantasies. And they are fantasies because there is no one in the world that has attempted these, while other parts of the world simply laugh and smile. The Chinas, the Indias, and the Russias, they're going to continue to do what they have to do to make sure that their populations achieve the same prosperity that we see here in the West, in North America, and in Europe. If we want to go down this road of net zero, I think we have to be very clear, as we're seeing here in Canada today, there's a massive cost, and much of that cost is borne directly by your standard and quality of life. It's totally unnecessary. And I think, if we look at the progress we've made in technology in the past, we can do these things without hurting human beings. We should be promoting the human condition, not trying to find cute, trendy ways to undermine it, and worse, make money in the process. Speaking of which, Canadians for Affordable Energy and the work that we do, whether it's predicting gas prices, whether it is helping you on policy, responding to government positions, we can't do this on our own. And we have been very fortunate in the past to have your help, public help. We continue to ask you for your donations. Please send them or contact us at affordableenergy.ca. In the meantime, let's wait for the next show. I'll be chock full of other ideas as how to approach other policy issues. Looking forward to our next engagement. Thank you.